Pauline Kamau. I work at AGRA as a strategy officer. My favorite food, there are many. My local food, which is called mokimo, which is a mixture of beans and what we call peas, mashed together with potatoes, made very nicely like I do. My expectations would be to see tangible commitments that can really support the food systems transformation agenda. Commitments around what everybody's role is going to be. So if it's a government minister, how they would work with institutions like AGRA to support smallholder farmers. If it's partners, how we can collaborate to make sure that our interventions are really bringing about that transformation. If it's resource partners, putting in commitments around being able to invest in agriculture to support the sector. So those commitments then would be very important in terms of holding ourselves accountable. We call ourselves the institutional shaper with 4 major roles. So the first is really development of strategy. For instance, we just completed our new strategy 2023 to 2027 with goals that we are pursuing along 4 business lines: seed systems, inclusive markets and trade, sustainable farming, and policy and state capability. So how do we translate that to a goal for instance, for somebody who's working in the communications unit? Frequently, quarterly, or biannually, we need to be able to track that we are actually going to meet our targets. If we are not, then we need to put in place corrective mechanisms so that ultimately we meet our goals. Because of the strategy, we must be able to implement it. I think the conversation is very, very important because it brings together critical pieces that lead us to thinking about food holistically. In some instances, for example, in a government, one would be inclined to think that food conversations would only belong to the Ministry of Agriculture. But when you think about it, for example, food is what leads, nutritious foods is what leads to healthy children, for example. So how does the Ministry of Health play a role? The Ministry of Finance is the one that will allocate budget to Ministry of Agriculture. How do they play a role? So it's bringing all those elements together around food and how it's made, how it's consumed, how it reaches the market. Just being able to bring all those pieces together, I think, is what makes the food system conversation really interesting. 2050 is not as far as it looks. I would like to see a sector, an Africa that really believes in growing its own food, but not only growing its own food, but being able to supply the world. I would like to see a sustainable Africa that is not relying on imports for foods that they can produce, and then that's what would lead to employment, particularly for the youth. So then we can really leverage on the youth dividend that Africa prides itself in. But how do we translate that into opportunities for that population? What I would like to see is that space where there's really belief in what we say as Africans, and we actually go out and do it.